Despite the extreme success of Lilo and Stitch, Disney is still struggling to find any of its footing, any of its grounds, and any of its reasonable content, as they've been struggling to do any of the stuff that Disney has been known for years, with their parks struggling, their movies failing, and of course Disney Plus being one of the biggest black holes in streaming scene so far, with even things like Paramount Plus outdoing the numbers that Disney Plus should be getting. They have once again fallen down into yet another pit, where before Disney was one of the hallmarks, one of the most important channels for children's content, they seem to be struggling in that degree as well, as they are now looking to buy Cocomelon. One of the biggest pieces of brain rot that was once one of the biggest industries out there, one of the most prolific shows to ever exist, with some of the highest viewership out of anything, only being topped by shows like Bluey. And while it seems like buying something like Cocomelon might be just exactly what Disney needs, as it's going to hopefully revitalize the brand, there seems to be a bit of a hitch. Cocomelon's failing. Viewership of Cocomelon is down 60%, and when you are one of the biggest brands in children's entertainment, 60% is such a significant hit. It's curious to see why they'd waste any money whatsoever. So before any further, like, subscribe, and let's get into this. So coming from that Park Place, Disney picks up Cocomelon streaming rights as Netflix walks away from declining preschool giant, fell 60% in viewership, written by Marvin Montanaro. Now the biggest problem with this entire thing is, like I mentioned earlier, Disney used to be the premier channel to put on for children of all ages. You had preschoolers, you had Disney Junior, you had young kids, you had the Disney Channel, and also any girl of any age, Disney Channel. You had rambunctious teenage boys, you had Disney Extreme. You had all of these different channels that covered so many different areas of the market. Disney was one of the dominant things. As somebody who grew up as a kid in the early 2000s, the Disney Channel was on non-stop. But that's mostly because my twin sister hated Cartoon Network. So when you see the channel that is known for making kids entertainment, for entertaining kids, for keeping kids glued to their screens, I mean, if you look back there at that giant wall of VHS tapes, you'll notice almost all of them are Disney movies. I have almost every single Disney clamshell box. They were once the kings of this kind of content, and now they have to go to a dying brand, something that has been marred by psychologists as extremely dangerous to children and extremely harmful for the development of kids, that this is what Disney has to rely on to do what their brand was once known for. Now this caught a lot of people by surprise, because for a while Cocomelon was once considered untouchable in the world of animated children's content, and is leaving Netflix and heading to Disney. The move to Disney Plus will take effect on January 2027, just months before the scheduled release of Universal-backed Cocomelon movie. How the hell are you going to make a Cocomelon movie? What is that going to be about? Just endless jumping fruit? But the real reason for this sale is because Cocomelon is basically becoming absolutely worthless. The use of the project is falling down to record lows. According to internal sources from Netflix that spoke to Deadline, Cocomelon viewership has cratered, dropping nearly 60% the first half of 2023 and the second half of 2024. That decline came despite the release of 4 new seasons, 9 through 12, within that same period, signaling what some insiders have called franchise fatigue. While the show still registers decent performance in the Nielsen Top 10 for children ages 2 to 5, it's far from the dominant force it once was. And it's pretty obvious, I think, as to why this has fallen such an extreme degree. Cocomelon was heavily utilized before people knew that it was particularly any kind of risk to their children. They just thought it was a cool way to get them to sit down, calm down, and chill out. But now, as we've had more and more people experiencing what happens when your kid grows up on Cocomelon, that has changed drastically. With many psychological journals noting the fact that watching Cocomelon and similar modern-day kids' TV shows can trigger a similar response in the brain to that of addiction. It causes a massive dopamine rush when they hear the songs that use extremely discordant tunes, starting low and jumping high and putting tunes that barely line up to each other. It causes a dopamine rush when they see massive flashing colors that alternate and create weird and bizarre patterns that these kids can't quite comprehend. All of these parts of Cocomelon create dopamine rushes and therefore creates an addiction. And things like Cocomelon cause extreme behavioral problems such as hyperactivity, such as extreme tantrums, and difficulty in regulating behavior, difficulty in motor actions. Kids who grew up watching Cocomelon from the ages of 1 to 2, at the age of 9 have decreased ability in motor function. They can't talk as well, they can't walk as well, and they can't move as well. They can't use their hands nearly as well as kids who grew up on other things. These kind of shows are described as it's really hard for them to enter the world of play and imagination and be able to fully engage their brains because it's used to sitting sitting there and being so passive, Mrs. Ingle said, so it tends to make behaviors a little bit worse because they just can't focus as well. And in fact, when compared to older entertainment such as the stuff from the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s Disney originals, they found that those shows had significantly more positive effect on these children. The kids were able to react and respond significantly better because these shows had a lot of slow and breathing room and allowed for people to take the time to adapt to the higher paced scenes with lower paced scenes and prevent themselves from getting onto a constant high. So it's kind of ironic to see that Disney, once one of the kings of these slower entertainment, the kind of things that were really positive for development, really helped kids learn and focus and even be calmed down when they're fussy and younger, is now just going into straight brain rot, the absolute opposite, because they can't manage making their own content. I have a 1-year-old nephew. He's adorable, love him, he's great, and we were watching some shows just to keep him entertained so he wouldn't cry and whatnot, and my dad put on Mickey Mouse Funhouse, which is a modern version of the Clubhouse, and the difference between the two were extreme, to say the least. The animation was much brighter, much wackier, much sharper. The characters were much higher pitch in discussion and voice. And of course, one of the weirdest parts is all the music was replaced with rap. It's all faster paced, high-low, high-low, high-low music, as opposed to the stuff like There May Be Giants doing the original Mickey Mouse Clubhouse song. It's a modern trend, and it's one that's very dangerous, and it's no shock that Disney is, of course, going full force. And what's even funnier is the only reason why Disney was able to acquire Cocomelon in the first place is because Netflix just dropped it. Because parents realize that Cocomelon is poisonous to their kids' brains. They realize that it's toxic and it won't help. The people who grew up watching Cocomelon when Cocomelon was big didn't know this show was dangerous, and now parents are waking up and realizing that this show isn't something you should show your kids, and that's why viewership has dropped a shockingly large amount. And of course, other shows that are slightly better, like Miss Rachel and similar things, are taking their place, but even those are being phased out completely because they're showing similar reductions in motor skills compared to older entertainment. And reports indicate that both Netflix and Disney submitted offers to renew licensing rights with Moonbug Entertainment, the Candle Media-owned company behind Cocomelon. Disney's offer was higher, but the narrative that Netflix was simply outbid doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Sources close to the matter claim Netflix made the strategic decision to let the brand go, citing waning returns and internal reassessment of their preschool slate. And in a similar vein, Netflix has already moved to secure the rights to Sesame Street and Peppa Pig, which may soon take Cocomelon's place in the platform's lineup. The acquisition, made public just weeks after Bloomberg first reported Cocomelon's pending departure, suggests Netflix had a replacement plan ready to go. Other Moonbug titles like Cocomelon Lane and Blippi will remain exclusive to Netflix, which could further dilute the Cocomelon brand by fragmenting its ecosystem across platforms. The movement of shows like Sesame Street and Peppa Pig as well are equally confounding, because those were being held by HBO Max, someone who doesn't have a whole lot of children's content, a service that's absolutely struggling right now as well, because they can't figure out their branding. Going from HBO to HBO Max to Max to HBO Max, back to Max, and now going back to HBO Max in a couple of weeks, it's a service that can't find its own identity, keeps buying and merging with different companies, and keeps throwing away half of its catalog, all because they can't figure out what to do with it. And so, of course, they get rid of the most important show in children's entertainment, being Sesame Street. Makes total sense to me. So obviously it's a bit of a slow news day, but this is still news nonetheless. The fact that Disney is looking to invest in what they were once the champions of shows a brand in extreme decline. Not that I have to tell you that. With the recent Lilo and Stitch movie coming out and forgetting every single core moral lesson that it once had, with them doing that with all of the live action movies, and none of them really being kids movies anymore, instead just generic Hallmark style movies. None of them focus on what was important, none of them look at the magic, none of them look at family, and none of them care about helping kids grow and making sure that kids are well developed for the future. And it's really just a sad state of affairs to see. And no, I really didn't want to talk about Cocomelon. But this show has significant cultural impacts, significant psychological impacts, and those are important to note. And more importantly, it is important to state that Disney is suffering so extremely if they have to rely on something like Cocomelon to keep their brand afloat. Disney Plus is in the hole massively, and while Lilo and Stitch is looking at an impressive $348 million box office, they're still struggling, and this one success isn't going to make up for all of their failures, and Cocomelon will not be the saving grace that they think it is, because that is a brand that people are quickly realizing is not worth watching. But that's pretty much all I've got. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this, and I will see you guys on the next one.